Brutal statements from Lewis Hamilton after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix at Jeddah unfolded into a devastating spectacle for Lewis Hamilton, a weekend so deeply wounding, so catastrophically misaligned with every expectation, that it now threatens to scar the final chapter of his legendary career. Beneath the blinding lights that turned the desert night into a furnace of pressure and scrutiny, Hamilton endured 50 grueling laps of futility, clawing for traction, searching for answers that never came, his every attempt to wrest performance from the Ferrari SF25 meeting only resistance. When the checkered flag finally fell, it was not victory, not even a modest gain, but a brutal reminder of reality. He crossed the line in P7, precisely where he had started, invisible to the cameras focused elsewhere, overshadowed even within his own team as Charles Leclerc basked in the champagne-soaked glory of a podium that seemed light years away. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. It was not merely a poor showing, it was a collapse of hope, an implosion of the storybook season so many had envisioned when Hamilton signed with Ferrari. What had been billed as a coronation of redemption, a last magnificent charge toward an eighth world title, now threatened to dissolve into a slow, painful decline, visible to all. His post-race interview, heavy with exhaustion and frustration, sent shockwaves through the paddock, as he openly admitted that he could not find his rhythm, could not extract the performance he needed from the car. It was not defiance. It was not anger. It was worse, it was resignation, the rarest and most chilling tone to ever escape from a champion like him. 16 points now separated Hamilton from Leclerc in the standings, a yawning chasm in a season that had barely begun, but one that already felt insurmountable. In an era where every hundredth of a second mattered, where the top 10 cars were sometimes separated by less than half a second in qualifying, such a deficit was not a mere stumble. It was a mortal wound. The realization was beginning to dawn on everyone. The narrative had shifted. Lewis Hamilton, the master of comebacks, the architect of miracle seasons, was not climbing a hill. He was attempting to scale a mountain with the wrong tools. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Jeddah had been circled on the calendar for months, earmarked as a critical battleground where Hamilton would assert his dominance, silence those who questioned his move to Maranello, re-establish himself not just as a contender but as the standard by which greatness would once again be measured. Instead, the circuit that once rewarded the bold and the brilliant mercilessly exposed every shortcoming he faced. The SF25, a car that had been praised for its straight-line speed and cornering stability, seemed to resist Hamilton's every instinctive input. The connection between driver and machine, the invisible thread that, when perfect, elevates good drivers to greatness, was frayed, sometimes missing altogether. Qualifying had been the first grim warning sign. In a session where perfection was required simply to survive, Hamilton found himself nearly half a second adrift from Leclerc. The gap wasn't just a number on the timing screens. It was a dagger through the heart of confidence. Each sector told its own damning story. Where Leclerc carved through the technical middle sector with precision and grace, Hamilton wrestled the Ferrari through every apex, compensating, adjusting, never able to find a natural flow. There were flashes of brilliance, a particularly daring run through turn 22 raised hopes, but they were isolated moments, drowned beneath an ocean of struggle. Come race day, whatever slim hopes remained were swiftly extinguished. While Leclerc danced through tire management stints like a seasoned conductor leading an orchestra, Hamilton fought a losing battle against degradation. On the medium compounds, Leclerc masterfully extended his stint, keeping the tires alive just long enough to attack when it mattered most. Hamilton, meanwhile, felt the life drain from his tires lap after agonizing lap, forced to pit earlier than planned, thrown into suboptimal strategy windows that only compounded his misery. Every lap told a story, and none of them were kind. Hamilton reported understeer in the medium-speed corners, sudden oversteer on exit, vibrations that destabilized his braking points, an inconsistent rear that punished him whenever he tried to push even a fraction beyond the comfort zone. His radio messages, usually calm and instructive, became terse, clipped, weighed down by the growing realization that there were no quick fixes coming. Strategy calls from the Ferrari pit wall became increasingly desperate, urging Hamilton to find pace where none existed, pleading with him to maintain tire temperatures, warning him to manage battery deployment, all to no avail. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Behind the scenes, the frustration boiled hotter. In the garage, Engineers pored over telemetry with grim faces, searching for any discrepancy, any anomaly that could explain why one SF-25 danced and the other stumbled. Some whispered about chassis variances, others blamed Hamilton's lingering lack of comfort with Ferrari's steering feedback system, a design philosophy so radically different from the Mercedes machinery he had mastered for over a decade. None of it changed the reality. The numbers were brutal, and they didn't lie. As Leclerc bounded onto the podium, soaking in the adulation of a team desperate for any taste of glory, Hamilton could only watch from the fringes, the loneliness of defeat cutting deeper than any words. The images told the story more eloquently than any report. Hamilton trudging back to the garage, helmet still on, visor down to hide the storm brewing in his eyes, mechanics offering half-hearted claps on the back that rang hollow against the enormity of the disappointment. In the post-race debrief, the atmosphere was funereal. Hamilton spoke quietly but firmly, outlining the issues he had battled all weekend. There was no blame directed at the team, no excuses manufactured. But the underlying truth was impossible to ignore. This was not the start he, or Ferrari, had envisioned. It wasn't just that Hamilton had underperformed. It was that for the first time in many years, he looked vulnerable, almost human, stripped of the aura of invincibility that had surrounded him for so long. And Jeddah, once seen as a springboard toward a final glorious championship campaign, now loomed large as a crossroads. Would Hamilton adapt? Would the team rally? Would the legend find a way, as he had so many times before, to rewrite the script? Or would this night under the relentless desert lights stand forever as the moment the dream truly began to slip away? The questions hung heavy in the night air, unanswered, as Lewis Hamilton, silent and solitary, disappeared into the Saudi darkness. In the frigid, merciless aftermath of the race, when emotions were raw and the paddock buzzed with the invisible electricity of discontent, Lewis Hamilton faced the cameras and microphones with a level of devastating honesty that stunned even those accustomed to his brutal self-critiques. His voice, usually layered with diplomacy and calculation, was instead weighed down by unfiltered frustration, each word dropping like heavy stones. There wasn't a single second this weekend where I felt connected with the car. Not one, he confessed, the defeat bleeding from his tone as clearly as it had from his lap times. His expression, usually controlled, almost regal, was drawn tight with disbelief. His brow furrowed as if still grappling with how a weekend filled with so much promise had so thoroughly unraveled in his hands. Even more striking than the confession itself was Hamilton's refusal to shift blame onto Ferrari's engineers, a move that would have been easy, even expected, given the circumstances. Instead, he made it clear where he believed the problem lay. Clearly, the car has podium potential. Charles proved that. I have no idea why I can't unlock that same potential. It's like I'm fighting against it every single step of the way, he admitted, the words slipping out with a kind of tortured bewilderment that revealed just how deeply the situation was gnawing at him. Beneath the surface, the telemetry data offered a picture even grimmer than Hamilton's words suggested. Deep within Ferrari's analysis rooms, engineers pored over lap traces, sector splits, and braking patterns with a sense of mounting concern. The cold reality was irrefutable. Hamilton was hemorrhaging time, particularly in the heavy braking zones, areas that historically had been among his strongest assets. Where Charles Leclerc seemed to dance with the car, slicing through apexes with millimeter-perfect artistry, Hamilton appeared locked in a clumsy tug-of-war. Every turn became a negotiation, every braking point a moment of hesitancy. Nowhere was this struggle more glaring than at turn 16, a critical pivot on the high-speed, treacherous Jeddah circuit, where precision and confidence were not luxuries but necessities. Throughout the weekend, Ferrari's technical team had suggested subtle adjustments, an earlier, more decisive braking approach entering turn 16 to optimize sector times, to carry just enough momentum without upsetting the rear end. Leclerc had adapted instantly, shaving tenths off each run with surgical finesse. Hamilton, uncharacteristically, failed to internalize the guidance. His braking points fluctuated. His corner entries lacked conviction. The telemetry lit up with inconsistencies, a painful visual echo of the struggle that no amount of experience could mask. Lap after lap, second after second, the deficits compounded like interest on a debt he couldn't pay. What began as a slight gap grew into a chasm, and by race day, it was no longer a matter of minor adjustments but an insurmountable wall between Hamilton and the frontrunners. Behind the closed, thickly tense walls of the Ferrari motorhome, the mood was grim. Conversations that started as debriefs quickly spiraled into urgent, serious strategy meetings. Every engineer, every strategist, wore a face carved from stone. The weekend had been more than just a missed opportunity. It had exposed a vulnerability that no one in red dared to ignore. Frédéric Vasseur, Ferrari's racing director known for his bluntness, faced the press shortly afterward. His words were chosen carefully but cut deeply. We had a brief conversation with Lewis after the race. It was a tough one for him. Inconsistency plagued him from Friday onward. He showed flashes. During his second stint he had a few brilliant laps. But overall, we need full consistency across every lap, every session. Not just glimpses, he stated, his tone offering little room for romantic notions about rebuilding weekends lost to chaos. Yet inconsistency was only the surface wound. What chilled the Ferrari leadership even more was Hamilton's own startling admission made behind closed doors to his engineers, a comment delivered half in jest, half in sheer exasperation. "Feels like I need a brain transplant to bond with this car," he had muttered, managing a strained chuckle that failed to mask the bitterness underneath. Those words spread through Maranello faster than any formal report could. It wasn't just a confession of frustration, it was a statement of disconnection so profound that it raised existential questions about the partnership itself. Ferrari does not hire drivers merely to exploit the strengths of their machines. Ferrari demands symbiosis. Their mythology is built on pilots who could mold themselves to the car's quirks, who could adapt their very instincts if necessary, bending their will to whatever beast Maranello bred in the pursuit of glory. In the Ferrari philosophy, there is no surrender to the car. There is only evolution, a constant, often painful metamorphosis until driver and machine are indistinguishable from each other in purpose and performance. To hear Hamilton, one of the most adaptable, intuitive and ruthless racers in Formula One history, speak of the SF24 as something alien, something resistant to his touch, was more than troubling. It was alarming. Within the team, speculation buzzed like hornets. Was it the brake balance? The rear instability Ferrari had fought so hard to tame? Was it a deeper philosophical mismatch between Hamilton's driving DNA, honed in years of Mercedes perfection, and the volatile spirit of a Ferrari chassis that demanded a different kind of finesse? Was it simply the inevitable turbulence of adjusting to a new environment after so many years with another family? Or, the darkest thought, was it something less tangible, something more human? Was it doubt? Was it the whisper of a legend sensing that the mountain might finally be too steep to climb? None of these questions had answers yet. But they filled the private corridors of the Ferrari compound like smoke, staining every conversation, every decision. Outside in the paddock, as the sun dipped below the Arabian skyline and the motorhomes began to empty, Hamilton was seen standing alone by the Ferrari hospitality area, gazing out across the paddock with a haunted look in his eyes. Not a single camera dared approach. Not a single reporter interrupted. In that moment, stripped of all the noise and narrative, he looked simply lost. It was not the image of a defeated man. It was the image of a warrior realizing that some battles are not fought against rivals but against oneself. And this was a war he would have to win, not for Ferrari, not for the critics, not even for history, but for the soul of the racer who still believed he could find his way back to the summit, no matter how brutal the climb might be. The deeper, more alarming reality lies not in the public interviews or the vague optimism spun in press conferences, but in the brutal truth of the raw telemetry data pouring back into Ferrari's engineering bays. The numbers don't lie, and they tell a harsh story. Side-by-side overlays of Hamilton's laps against his rivals reveal the extent of the struggle with painful clarity. Hamilton, who once made a career out of dancing his cars on the edge of grip and control, now finds himself fighting a machine that refuses to obey his instincts. The Ferrari demands a level of rear-end sensitivity and knife-edge balance that Hamilton, at least for now, cannot consistently summon. In contrast, Max Verstappen at Red Bull continues to perform surgical miracles, pushing the car into precarious zones of instability with almost supernatural confidence, making the impossible look routine, leaving Hamilton's telemetry looking clumsy and blunt by comparison. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc, Ferrari's long-suffering prince, has become the team's unexpected lifeline. While the headlines and marketing dollars swirl around Hamilton, it is Leclerc who is quietly dragging the team forward, salvaging critical points, and keeping Ferrari's dignity intact in the constructors' standings. Without Leclerc's resilience and razor-sharp qualifying performances, Ferrari's season would already be crumbling into a slow, painful descent toward mediocrity. The internal whispers acknowledge it even if the public never will. Right now, it is Charles who is saving Maranello from deeper humiliation. For his part, Hamilton is desperately trying to project optimism, at least outwardly. Facing the microphones after another grueling race weekend, He forces a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. His voice, smooth and practiced, carries the cadence of hope, but underneath, the cracks are visible. "It's not the end of the world," he insisted post-race, speaking with a forced lightness that felt just a bit too rehearsed. "But there's a ton of lap time sitting there that I'm not extracting. Losing 2/10 in Sector 1, 3/10 in Sector 3, it's just not good enough. I'm working night and day to fix it, but it's not clicking the way I need it to. I know the fans are frustrated. I know the team's frustrated. I know the bosses are frustrated. And believe me, nobody's more frustrated than I am." The frustration is not casual, it is existential. Hamilton knows exactly what is at stake. He is not just fighting for race wins. He is fighting for legacy, for validation, for the right to be remembered not simply as a man who conquered with superior weapons, but as a warrior who could also win with blood, grit, and heart. This moment, more than any before, is the crucible in which Hamilton must forge a new version of himself. Every whisper that accompanied his bombshell move to Ferrari is echoing louder now. Could he adapt? Could he rebuild? Could he transform frustration into triumph? Throughout his glittering career, there had always been a quiet undercurrent of skepticism, that Hamilton, while undoubtedly brilliant, had rarely been forced to suffer through truly uncompetitive machinery the way others had. He had arrived at Mercedes at the dawn of its domination. He had surfed the wave of technical supremacy, reaping the rewards of precision German engineering and near-perfect strategy. Critics pointed to Michael Schumacher's years of slog and sacrifice at Ferrari, rebuilding the team brick by agonizing brick, and wondered if Hamilton possessed that same dogged patience, that same raw ability to develop a team and a car from the ground up. Now, those doubts are no longer whispered, they are shouted from rooftops. The harsh reality of the 2025 season is that Ferrari's internal priorities are already shifting. The murmur within the factory walls grows louder with each disappointing weekend. The clock ticking down to the 2026 regulation overhaul, the biggest technical reset in Formula One's hybrid era, is pushing Ferrari's leadership to consider abandoning full development of the current car. The team, it seems, is preparing to cut their losses, reallocate their brightest minds and freshest resources toward building the next generation contender. And if that decision is formalized, Hamilton's situation could deteriorate further and faster than anyone had anticipated. Every ounce of energy pulled away from the SF24, every cancelled upgrade, every abandoned aerodynamic tweak, means fewer opportunities for Hamilton to understand the car, fewer setups to try, fewer margins to claw back against the relentless onslaught from McLaren, Red Bull, and even the resurgent Mercedes squad. The single-lap deficit is where Hamilton's struggles are most brutally exposed. Over race distances, his experience and tire management skills still keep him afloat, allowing him to salvage respectable finishes. But qualifying, the sharpest, most merciless test of raw synergy between man and machine, has become a battlefield where Hamilton is increasingly outgunned. His inability to extract the final critical tenths when the tires are peaking and the fuel is at its lightest was never more evident than under the floodlights of Jeddah. There, on the brutal high-speed street circuit where commitment and trust in the car are non-negotiable, Hamilton spent the entirety of practice sessions mired outside the top 10, his telemetry riddled with hesitations and corrections in the high-speed sections. When it mattered most, during Q2, Hamilton barely scraped through by the skin of his teeth, eking out a nervy lap that was good enough for 10th, a lap that showed none of the effortless authority that once defined him. By the time Q3 rolled around, the truth was plain, he was nowhere near the front. On a track where confidence is everything, where bravery pays dividends, Hamilton looked like a man wrestling a wild animal he didn't fully trust. Internally, the team's technical debriefs are increasingly fraught. Engineers are running out of answers. Hamilton's feedback is detailed but sometimes contradictory. A car too twitchy on corner entry, yet too lazy in mid-corner rotation. A car that understeers when he pushes but snaps when he eases off. No single fix has unlocked the performance he craves. Setups are being thrown at the problem like darts at a board, but nothing sticks. Within the walls of Maranello, where pride and politics dance a delicate ballet, uncomfortable conversations are already beginning behind closed doors. The unspoken question lingers: if Hamilton cannot adapt to the Ferrari way of driving, if he cannot mold himself to the car's DNA, then what happens next? How long will the Tifosi's patience last? How long will Ferrari's upper brass tolerate a legend who, at least for now, is producing only flashes of brilliance instead of the sustained excellence they gambled everything to obtain? Outside the factory, among the fans who live and breathe the red dream, the mood is growing restless. The Tifosi are passionate, yes, but they are also unforgiving. Ferrari legends are judged not only by their victories but by their sacrifices, their struggles, their blood spilled for the Scuderia. Hamilton, once embraced as the man who could return the prancing horse to its rightful throne, now faces the daunting task of proving he is worthy of wearing the sacred red. The question hanging over Maranello, over Hamilton, over the entire season, is simple and devastating. Will Lewis Hamilton bend Ferrari to his will? Or will Ferrari break Lewis Hamilton first? Hamilton stood in front of the microphones, his body language a portrait of frustration barely concealed beneath a veil of professionalism. His shoulders sagged slightly under the weight of expectation, his helmet still tucked awkwardly under his arm. There was no triumphant smile, no fierce glint in his eyes, only a quiet resignation as he addressed the media gathering like a man carrying invisible bruises. "I'm just grateful to have made it into Q3, he confessed, his voice subdued. His words slipping out with a heaviness that felt almost foreign to a man so often associated with brilliance under pressure. It wasn't the lap I needed, it wasn't spectacular, it wasn't clean enough. I'm thankful just to be up there, still fighting. But bonding with this machine, over a single lap, it's proving harder than I imagined." Those close enough could hear the disappointment between the syllables. This wasn't Hamilton making excuses. This was Hamilton confronting a reality he could neither outdrive nor outwill. Inside Ferrari's command center, the tension was becoming impossible to hide. The team's technical leadership, who once greeted Hamilton's arrival like the beginning of a new golden era, now stared at telemetry screens with furrowed brows and grim expressions. Privately, several top engineers had already started framing Shanghai as the ultimate referendum. If Hamilton, a seven-time world champion, a driver whose record in China included some of the most dominant performances ever witnessed in Formula One, could not unlock the potential of the SF25 at a circuit he traditionally owned, then the warning lights would no longer be blinking, they would be flashing red in sirens so loud they would drown out even the roar of the engines. Frederick Vasseur, normally a master of diplomatic understatement, offered no comforting words when questioned. Instead, he laid the situation bare for anyone willing to listen. "We have been losing 0.3 of a second just in the first sector since the very first practice session," Vasseur revealed, his voice clipped, precise, almost surgical. The same pattern repeated itself through qualifying. Lewis is nearly a full second adrift from pole. In these types of situations, when you lack absolute trust in the car, especially on street-style circuits where the walls are mere centimeters away, the punishment is brutal and it is immediate. There is no hiding. There was a sense, almost palpable now, that the dream Ferrari had painstakingly constructed around Hamilton, the bold vision of him storming to an 8th world championship clad in red, was beginning to unravel at the seams. Inside closed-door strategy meetings, conversations were already shifting. Whispers floated through the corridors suggesting the development focus might pivot earlier than expected toward the 2026 car, a devastating tacit admission that this year's championship aspirations were slipping from their grasp like sand through open fingers. From the outside looking in, the situation was no less dire. A glance at the current championship standings painted a picture more damning than any technical report ever could. Max Verstappen was extending his dominance with clinical precision. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri continued their upward trajectory at McLaren with youthful exuberance. George Russell quietly carved out his place among the new guard of F1 contenders. Meanwhile, Hamilton found himself marooned, fighting not for victories but for scraps, struggling against a machine that seemed to reject every ounce of his immense skill set like an organism fighting off an incompatible transplant. The SF25 was not merely unpredictable, it was hostile. Its behavior was erratic under braking, capricious mid-corner, and punishingly snappy on exit. Trust, the cornerstone of any driver's relationship with his car, was absent. The steering responses felt artificial, the rear end seemed to disobey instructions under load changes, and the car's aerodynamic balance, particularly in high-speed corners, flickered unpredictably from manageable to treacherous without warning. Every lap was a negotiation, every corner a gamble. For Hamilton, who built his success on an almost supernatural sensitivity to a car's limits, this mechanical rebellion was more than frustrating, it was soul-crushing. In the past, he had overcome adversity through instinct, adjusting his style to wring performance from difficult machinery, but the SF25 was different. It didn't respond to his artistry. It didn't reward his bravery. It spat back his corrections, leaving him stranded between pushing too hard and backing off too much, neither option leading to the lap times he demanded of himself. Meanwhile, the paddock sharks circled. Pundits speculated whether Hamilton had miscalculated his move to Ferrari entirely, whether the allure of Maranello's mythos had clouded the hard-headed racing instincts that once made him unbeatable. Former champions weighed in on broadcasts, some sympathetically suggesting that time and circumstance were conspiring against him, others more ruthlessly declaring that the new generation had simply eclipsed the old lion. In private moments, Hamilton's inner circle knew the truth that the cameras could not see. He was not beaten. He was not diminished. He was raging against a situation where even his legendary talents could not compensate for a machine that refused to become an extension of his will. He was fighting an invisible battle, one made harder by every passing race where the SF-25 seemed less a weapon in his hands and more an enemy disguised in scarlet. The pressure was suffocating. Every sector split that flashed green for a rival and yellow for Hamilton drove a dagger deeper. Every radio call reminding him of a delta to manage felt like a concession. Every Sunday where he crossed the line far from the podium chipped away at the myth, and yet, he continued to show up, to throw the car at the limit, to fight battles others would have surrendered long ago. As Shanghai loomed, it was not just another race. It was a reckoning. It was the moment where all the hope, all the risk, all the sacrifice that had carried Hamilton to Ferrari would either ignite into glory or crumble into bitter acceptance. There was no more room for illusions. The world was watching, holding its breath. And deep down, even Hamilton knew, if he couldn't conquer the SF-25 here, on the very streets he had once ruled, then the fairy tale might not have a happy ending after all. But if there was one thing the world should have learned by now, it was never to count Lewis Hamilton out. Not while there was still breath in his body. Not while there was still a wheel to race. And certainly not while there was still history left to write. Martin Brundle, whose sharp eye and encyclopedic knowledge of Formula One have made him one of the most respected voices in the paddock, didn't mince words during Sky F1's post-race debrief. His tone, usually measured and analytical, carried an unmistakable weight, the tone of a man who had seen the rise and fall of many greats and knew when the sands of time were starting to shift. There were weekends during Lewis's absolute prime, Brundle remarked, a subtle sadness creeping into his voice, where he wouldn't lose 7/10 over the course of an entire race distance, never mind bleeding that much in a single sector. Watching him now, seeing him struggle with the car, second-guessing his braking points, losing trust in the grip with every corner he exits, it's unsettling. It's almost uncomfortable to witness. It wasn't just an offhand comment made for the sake of drama. It was a somber observation from someone who had seen firsthand the razor-sharp instincts and almost supernatural control that once defined Hamilton's every move on the track. Brundle wasn't attacking, he was lamenting. There was no joy in calling it what it was, a champion, one of the greatest in the sport's rich tapestry, grappling with forces both internal and external, and beginning to lose that battle. Brundle went further, suggesting that Hamilton might have backed himself into a technical cul-de-sac. With development windows closing rapidly, there were real concerns that Hamilton's specific demands for car setup and balance were sending Ferrari down a developmental path that simply wasn't working. Instead of building a machine around his legendary late-braking high-traction style, Ferrari seemed to be delivering a car increasingly at odds with his natural instincts. Each race weekend, instead of refining the package, Hamilton appeared to be wrestling it, forcing performance out of it, overdriving it in ways he rarely had to during his peak Mercedes years. And desperation was beginning to ooze through the cracks. Tiny mistakes, braking half a meter too late, getting on the power fractionally too soon, the sort of errors Hamilton once punished other drivers for, now began creeping into his own performances. He was no longer carving through traffic like a scalpel through silk, he was battling it, tooth and nail, sometimes winning, sometimes not. The dance had become a struggle. And the entire F1 world was watching. In the garage, quiet conversations were growing louder. Engineers exchanged glances over telemetry sheets that painted a grim picture. Mechanics, once buoyed by the legend in red, now muttered about setup misfires and driver discomfort. Team principals sat in debriefs, weighing uncomfortable truths. Was it time to shift their strategic focus? Was their future still tied to a fading star, or did they need to look beyond, toward 2026 and the massive regulations reset that promised a new era for whoever could master it first? For Hamilton, the pressure was unlike anything he had faced before. This wasn't Max Verstappen breathing down his neck or Sebastian Vettel across the pit lane. This was time itself, the cruel ticking of the clock, the knowledge that every missed opportunity, every wrong setup call, every mishandled race wasn't just costing points, but writing a different ending to his story. Not the fairy tale many had envisioned when the Ferrari move was announced, but but something far less romantic. A slow, painful fade. The paddock chatter grew louder with every passing race weekend. Would Ferrari, sensing the futility of salvaging a slipping season, pivot entirely toward developing their 2026 car, leaving Hamilton trapped in a 2-year limbo? Would they effectively abandon 2025 as a lost cause, sacrificing their biggest star's final chance at glory in favor of long-term gain? If so, what would that mean for Hamilton's legacy? Could a man so used to fighting for championships accept running out his final laps in midfield mediocrity, scrambling for podiums only when fortune intervened? Among fans, the conversation grew even more fevered. On forums, in group chats, on endless Twitter threads, the questions multiplied. Was this just a temporary dip, a rocky period of adjustment before Hamilton roared back with the resilience he had made his trademark? Or was this the beginning of an irreversible decline, a slow unspooling of a career that had once seemed bulletproof? It wasn't just about results anymore. It was about symbolism. Every mistimed corner exit, every disappointing Q2 elimination, every weary, tight-lipped interview carried an unbearable weight. This wasn't the Lewis Hamilton fans had built shrines to. This was a different version, one battling not just rivals on track, but the silent, inescapable enemy of all great athletes, time. Paddock insiders whispered of growing tensions behind closed doors. Hamilton's legendary attention to detail, once the stuff of myth, was reportedly bordering on obsession. Endless meetings. Demands for simulator runs deep into the night. A man who once trusted his instincts now poring over data for hours, chasing solutions that seemed increasingly elusive. And yet, there were glimpses. Flashes of the old magic. A daring late-breaking move into turn 1. A miraculous recovery drive after a disastrous pit stop. Moments that reminded everyone why they had believed so fiercely in him in the first place. But moments weren't enough. Not for a man like Hamilton. Not at Ferrari. And certainly not at this stage of his career. The question hanging in the air, unavoidable, piercing, brutal, was simple. Could Lewis Hamilton still turn this nightmare around? Could he, through sheer willpower, drag himself and Ferrari back from the brink, force the story back onto its destined track? Or had the fairy tale ending, the vision of Hamilton, clad in Ferrari red, hoisting one final championship trophy against the scarlet backdrop of Monza, already slipped forever out of reach? And perhaps more urgently, would Ferrari even give him the chance to fight that battle? Or had the men in the boardrooms already made the cold calculation that their future lay elsewhere, in wind tunnel runs, in 2026 simulations, in young, hungry talent not burdened by the heavy weight of a legend's fading hopes? As the dust settled over another bruising weekend, as fans filtered out into the Arabian night, as the paddock began packing up for the long haul to the next battleground, one truth remained. The clock was ticking. And Lewis Hamilton, for all his greatness, for all his past glories, was running out of time to change the ending of his story.